All right, everyone, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. So just a few pieces of housekeeping. My name is Alex Niedermeyer, and I work with Tetra Tech based in Washington, D.C. And for using the Zoom platform, just a few things in case you're not familiar. So all participants are automatically muted when you come in. So don't worry that you need to try to find the mute button. You're automatically muted. And then panelists have the option to unmute and turn on their video. You are welcome to interact with the panelists and the moderator using the Q&A button if you'd like to. So please do send your questions, any questions you might have for the presenters using the Q&A button, and then we can both answer you in real time with text messages, or when we, at the end of the session, we can answer more of those questions. And then also use the chat feature, please. So you're welcome to introduce yourself and share comments, resources, anything like that. And all of the Q&A and chat feature will all be saved and available at the end of the conference. We are recording the sessions, and those will be made available to you all later as well. The presentations also are all being saved, and I believe those will be available at the end of the conference.
So for the 1531,
so with that, I will hand it over to our moderator to go ahead and get us started.
Great. Thanks very much, Alex. Real pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Matt Somerville. I'm especially pleased to be with you from Lusaka. You see today I'm wearing a mask, not even about abundance of caution, because I am in my house alone at the moment. But just to remind you all that if you do happen to be watching or joining in a room with other people or in a crowded space, that you might want to consider wearing a mask. And, you know, even though things in Zambia seem to be calming down right now with COVID-19, we know our neighbors in Mozambique are really expanding quite quickly. So just as a public service announcement, do continue to be safe and be careful and be vigilant, no matter where you are in country. I will take my mask off for the moment and introduce our program for the day and really for the week. So again, welcome to the second session of the annual research symposium. Last week was a great event. We had 3 days, about 100 people in each session each day. I hope that we can continue that momentum over the course of the next 3 weeks. As Alex noted, please do use the chat function that you see beneath. Note that when you do use it, it will give you a selection to just send things to panelists or send to panelists and attendees. Please do select panelists and attendees so that all your other colleagues can hear. Right now, we're up to about 50 people online. Really pleased to have you all, see so many familiar faces from both in Zambia and outside, and also to see many new faces and names as well. So please do introduce yourself on the bottom on your chat function. And again, if you would like questions to be answered along the way, please feel free to use the Q&A session. We will try to address as many as possible during this during the event, and I'll encourage our panelists to answer questions. Even if someone poses a question to someone else on the panel, feel free to use it in a bit of a discussion so that we can emulate a real conversation here. So today's session focuses on land documentation on state land. Tomorrow we'll focus on land documentation on customary land. Last week, when the Director of Planning from the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources received a number of questions related to the status of the National Land Titling Program. She artfully requested that our first presenter today, Mr. Tembo, will be able to address some of those questions that may have come up last week. So today we're going to be looking at state land, land documentation processes from a number of different perspectives, a few government perspectives, a private sector perspective, and really get some details. We hope that this discussion helps to generate more discussion and interest across the country, particularly in terms of researching the impacts of both the way that the National Titling Program occurs and the impacts of the National Titling Program and similar events on customary land. With that, we are up to 55 attendees, and I'll take no further time in introducing, most greatest pleasure in introducing Mr. Emmanuel Tembo, who has really done everything in the field of land tenure in Zambia over recent years. Emmanuel is a geomatics engineer, and he works as the manager of the National Land Titling Program, which has an office in Showgrounds in Lusaka. He has over 30 years of experience in the land sector, both in Zambia and outside. He's worked as a land surveyor with the City Council, a lecturer in engineering surveys and GIS and remote sensing, and as a consultant on land governance and administration. Real pleasure to have Emmanuel here today, and hopefully to be able to get together in person sometime in the near future. So Emmanuel, please feel free to take it over on an assessment of title uptake in the systematic land titling program.
Mike, thank you very much. I'll quickly switch on my video and then I'll switch it off. Thank you kindly for that introduction. My name is Emmanuel Tembo. I'm presenting a paper we wrote together with Joseph Minango, who's the Surveyor General. We are looking essentially the assessment of the uptake of titles under the Systematic Land Titling Program, which was started by the Ministry of Lands in 2017. I will quickly look at the process itself so we can understand what we do in the Systematic Land Titling Program. Essentially, in this program, we are we're titling mostly informal areas. And what we are doing through the support of service providers is to essentially select an area which we are calling a demarcation area. And we want to use as much as possible aerial images or orthophotos to actually identify boundaries. And based on that, do simple layout or plans, which then can be passed on to the local authorities for purposes of approval as required by the Urban and Regional Planning Act. When we've done that, we then send people to do what we call the social survey, where we sensitize the people to say we are coming into an area and we want to then collect data about who actually is sitting on that property. And when we do collect that data, we then do a verification to ensure that if there are any objections, we can then correct for those objections. When that is done, then we have automated the process of numbering. We push this information into the National Land Titling System. And in that system, we're able to generate survey diagrams, generate the general plans, and create the necessary land records. When the land records are created, and they are linked now to the general plans, we can then be able to create the offer letters and ask our clients who would have collected information from the field to then come and sign the lease. When they sign the lease, we then ask the commissioner to sign, commissioner and his witness to sign, and then the chief registrar to issue the certificate of title. Next slide. Now, our concern, obviously, we're looking at the fact that in Lusaka so far, we've done 53,000 records collected in those areas that are shown in red there. Essentially about 32 demarcation areas. Of those areas, you will notice that we've only distributed 15,000 records, offer letters. And of those offer letters, 11,000 were picked. So what is critical there, I think, for us, when we're doing the analysis, is the number of people who have actually paid based on the number of offers distributed. Next. Okay, so we're saying the number of people or properties that have paid out of the distributed numbers, we are looking at 4,268 out of the 15,000. Now that is where there's been a concern that if we were to upscale this, what will it mean? We can go to the next slide, which shows the areas where we have been and how many people have paid in terms of percentages. What we see here is that when we are carrying out the engagement with the community, as we stated in the first slide, there seems to be a willingness for people to get title. We'll have a huge crowds, ceremonies even on the when offers are being given out. However, post-sensitization, what we are seeing is that there is a decline in numbers. So as we said, of the offer letters that we printed out and went into the field to collect, 72% were actually collected. But in terms of payments, we see that 27% people are collected. 28% haven't been collected of those offer letters that we went around to select to the areas. This is due to a number of reasons. We can go to the next slide. Okay, here we're trying to show, basically by numbers, we've covered, I think these were 13 areas which were covered. The bottom number shows what was captured. So if we zoom in, for example, we can zoom to any one of those. If you right click and zoom, yeah, okay, thanks. So let me take the example of Livala or Kamwala. We see there that we captured 1,770 properties, and ultimately we took 1,770 offers to the community, but only 1,536 were actually collected by the offerees. And out of that, 1,231 paid. This represents a reasonable number compared to, for example, if you look at Bowlen. Bowlen, we had the first one on the left there, we had 730 that were distributed. And so far, in terms of payment, only 278 had paid out of the 730. So if you scroll around the whole of these, you will see that the top number represents who has paid. Kabanana, in this case, we had not, at the time when we were compiling this, Kabanana had not yet started the payment. We had just distributed the offer letters. So what are we seeing with this? We can go to the next page. Yeah. What we are seeing is that there is a time lag between the data collection and the actual offer letter. We started this exercise in July of 2018, and some of the offer letters were only being done this year. That's 2 years down the line. So a lot has happened in between, in the sense that some of them would have sold the property, and the property would have changed hands anyway. And so this is one of the problems. Others think that immediately they get an offer letter, it is sufficient security, which does not warrant them to pay the fees that are required to be paid. Others consider the fees to be expensive, given that we were looking at informal areas where people's incomes are very low. However, one of the major issues is also the issue of payment, which is done centrally at the HQ. And so you can see the picture there shows people who have been enumerated, and they have come now to make payments and things like that. So this kind of delays the process a great deal. Some will come and then they'll leave because they'll see a long queue. And then when even those that pay, there's a period in which we'll have to ask them to come and to sign the lease. This can take 2 weeks or even more, and maybe another month for them to finally collect the COTs. But again, there are issues of encumbrance. So we've broadly categorized these issues as follows. If you go to the next slide. What we think that we need to have a systematic land education law as soon as possible, to ensure that if we go into an area and we declare it a demarcation area, all other laws for the time being would be suspended until we clear and adjudicate all the rights in those areas. We think that that would be a neater way of doing it and ensuring that we do have would have cleared an area as adjudicated. Currently, we are using the current laws as they are, and what we are seeing is that we are getting contestations in those areas by people who might have had their land encroached on. So we see that the third bullet there talks about the issue of encumbered properties in the demarcation areas. How do we deal with them, given that for all intents and purposes, the land cannot be taken back to the owners. So that is a challenge we need to deal with. Then we are looking at the fact that if we are going to quickly do this, we are looking at the electronic certificates of title and the electronic signatures. Currently, the legal framework does not allow this. And so we are hoping that the Ministry of Justice can help us move towards allowing for electronic signatures. For example, we'll tell you that for offer letters that we are sending out to the communities, each offer letter has to be signed manually. So we have to distribute this to our lands officers to do the signing, and this can take anything like 5 days for all the areas to be done. And so you see that this can also cause problems. We also have a challenge regarding council's requirements for development fees upfront before title can be issued. Councils, you will notice when they are offering land, they require that people pay what they call a premium, and that premium can be anything between 20,000, 50,000. We've seen all sorts of numbers being bandied around. And so if people are offered pieces of land and there's a 20,000, they need to pay the council before they get the title. That also creates a problem. Also, the councils within the Urban and Regional Planning Act have the right to issue titles. So we are looking at this, that this is in terms of what we have assessed. Going forward, if we have to roll out this, we need to ensure that the electronic certificates of titles and electronic signatures are done with immediate effects. Otherwise, we are going to battle, and the length of time that we are going to ensure that we do 4 million titles, which we want to do, will not take place. We do have the issue of encumbered properties, and we think that to go around this problem, we'll have to look at the mechanism under the proposed adjudication law, where we can immediately and quickly resolve encumbrances and move the process forward quickly. The payment platforms, we want to think that if we can engage mobile operators, we can engage banks, we might decentralize the payment instead of everyone coming to the ministry. That will help a lot. So, moderator, you can go to the last slide. We want to say that those are the areas we think we need to address as soon as possible, that it will then help us in terms of ensuring that the numbers of payments improves. What we see is that it's not necessarily the fact that people are not able to pay, but that because of those underlying issues, people are not paying in time. They have to queue. They find it difficult. A number of times they've come to us and said, I'm queuing as if I'm getting a free something when I'm actually queuing for payment. I'm the one paying and I have to queue. So those are the areas we are trying to deal with. And we are working with our partners. We hope that we'll come up with a platform for extra payments and also ensure that the issues of encumbrance are dealt with. We are dealing with Ministry of Justice. We hope that that also can be resolved soon. Moderator, I want to submit. I think this is my last slide. You can contact us at the email address that is provided. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. A really enlightening presentation, and great to see. 5 years ago when USAID hosted the first symposium of this sort, all of this was theory, or most of this was theory. There was nothing happening per se in terms of large-scale systematic documentation efforts. So hats off to you all for gaining this experience as you move along. There were a few questions from the audience I'd like to pose to you just quickly for clarification. The first one is the difference from Royal is asking, what's the difference between an offer letter being picked and paid? Can one pick the letter without payment? And then the second question would be, what types of title are we giving here? Are these occupancy licenses or actual 99-year certificates? So happy to hear those before we move on to the next presentation.
Okay, thank you for those questions from Roy. In terms of the issue of picking the offer letter, the offer letters, what we did was the requirement generally is that there has to be in Section 4 of the Lands Act, there has to be consideration in order for an offer letter to be given. And so for that to happen, a client or an offeree is supposed to pay some form of consideration, which in this case, we came up with a novel way of doing it by saying, okay, if they pay 1 kwacha, then they're entitled to be given an offer letter. Now, when we say offers picked and paid, this is where now the payments that we have proposed is that someone will pay a minimum of 20%. When they pay a minimum of 20% of the consideration and preparation fees, for the low income groups, it's 3,122. I mean, for the low cost properties, it's 3,122. If they pay 20%, the ministry then goes ahead and prints actually the certificate of title. So when we say offers picked, it means that they fulfill the 1 kwacha requirement, but it doesn't mean that they have paid anything. It's only those which have paid, who are the 4,000, who have paid the minimum 20%. Now, in regard to the second question, the occupant's license or certificate of title, the ministry does not issue occupant's license. This is done under the ambit of local authorities. So what the ministry is doing is, where possible, is actually to convert all occupants' licenses to 99-year lease certificate of title. I must hasten to say that in certain cases, it's not possible to do that conversion where people have some title or occupant's license. But the idea is all titles would be converted where possible to 99-year lease, so that people can have secure title. But we do understand that there will be areas where we cannot manage to do this, because obviously the extent of land is not well defined, because that has to be well defined in order for us to then issue the 99-year lease. I hope I answered those 2 questions.
Thanks so much, Emmanuel. We are going to move on to the next presenter, but there is some homework. People are putting questions in there, so if you do have a moment to type in some answers, for example, on electronic signature and a little more on fees, feel free to type in on the question and answer. You have the ability to respond. But with that, just a few more housekeeping. We're now up to, let me see, 71 participants. I'll remind presenters quickly that you have 15 minutes. I'll try to be fairly strict on that. The video of this, the presentations themselves will be made public at the end of this month, once all of our weeks have gone by. The recordings of this session will be available on YouTube by the end of this week. But just to remind you that if any of your other colleagues are interested, the link you have to join is available for the whole month. So you can use that link at any point to join on Wednesdays and Thursdays from 13 to 15. And also note that if you register or registered on time early in the process, you are eligible for a small internet bundle to help cover the costs of being online for so many hours. The final thing, and what's encouraging, I hope, some of our presenters, is that at the end of this month, in our 33 presenters, we do hope to offer a sponsorship to attend the World Bank Land and Poverty Conference the next time it's open in public, so that these presentations can be made at a global level. We want to get both global presentations down to Zambia and Zambian presentations to the global level. So really looking forward to that. With that, I'm pleased to come up to our next presenter. Zelita Chunga, Zelita Piri Chunga, is an urban planner. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in Urban and Regional Planning and is currently based in Chinsali, up in Machinga province. She works with the local authority as a town planner, and she's co-published a paper on constraining factors in realizing strategic plan objectives by local authorities in Zambia. Zelita's passionate about her profession. Her passion for the welfare of people has seen her work hard to ensure that service delivery is met in her field. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in this topic of local authorities in relationship to planning and land documentation to come back in 2 weeks where we will specifically be talking about the integrated development plan process and how that links to land rights. But with that, Zelita, really pleased to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for that warm welcome. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those that are not in Zambia. I hope I'm very audible from where you are. So our study today is an overview of land documentation within an extended planning boundary. Next slide, please. So you would wish to know that here in Chinsali, it was recently declared as a provincial capital, and from the time it was declared a provincial capital, the old planning boundary stretched to a radius of 6 kilometers. But now, after the extension, the planning boundary has roughly about a 30-kilometer radius. So our planning boundary covers approximately 25,000 hectares of land, and our projected population estimated up to 104,560 people. So the reason for this study is there are really no set guidelines on what to do when a planning boundary has been extended. So we can go to the next slide. Some strategies that our local authority has employed according to our local economic development plan are village mapping, settlement upgrading of existing and unplanned settlements. So the local authority has developed a local strategy whose goal is to upgrade the existing villages and unplanned settlements. And the expected result of this are to ensure that people have secure land and improved services. So we want to see people having secured land, because being in an area like this, we do realize that a lot of people are traditional and they really uphold the culture and the values of the land. So when you come to them and say, no, the council wants to give you proper documentation or formal documentation, they feel we're taking away the authority of the chief or the headman, because initially they already have that document they've been using all along. So the challenge we've had is that when you look at a village setup, land is just allocated in any way. There is no standard that is being followed. So the reason for this study covers that. And when we talk about village mapping, we are focusing on the prime areas that we have in Chinsali, and settlement upgrading is being done for the more dense areas where the population is already big and well established. We can go to the next slide. So some of the interventions that we've done, considering the challenges that we've had so far, are community sensitization, engagement, settlement mapping, enumeration, and profiling. So when we focus on community sensitization, we don't only do this as a planning department, but we engage other stakeholders so that when we sit down with that community, we help them realize that it's no longer a village. After the extension of the planning boundary, Chinsali saw over 10 villages being included as part of the boundary, I'm sure we're able to tell from the size and the expanse of the land that we have within our planning boundary. So community sensitization has been very key for us because we're trying as much as possible to get on the ground, engage the communities so that they are part of the planning process and they're able to understand what exactly is going on. So in these interventions that we are doing, in the prime areas, when we go on the ground, we look at the type of development that can be done in that area. So when we look at our local area plan, which was done just when the province was declared as a provincial capital, um, you tell that the local area plan is not matching what is on the ground because you have an area that is designated for industries, but there's an existing village there already. So what we do is we go on the ground, pick the coordinates for each household as it is, then we see whether there's enough land to carry out what we have planned in our local area plan, or we have to just redirect our focus and think of how best we can help the community as well. We can go to the next slide. So our findings, under settlement upgrading, we have two well-defined villages here in Chinsali. Those happen to grow right outside the old planning boundary. So those got established really fast. And one of them has 463 households and the other has over 1,500 households that existed as villages. The challenge we've been having in those areas is that those are low cost areas, very low cost, and most of the settlers there exist on less than $1 a day. So most of them are unable to meet the cost of the occupancy license because it's a bit costly for them to even pay the small charge that we have estimated as a council for them to pay. Then another thing that we've done is we have numbered the settlements and we have registered the properties. So each property has a number and we are issuing out occupancy licenses to them. Then a pilot project of Kabuta is still ongoing so that we see and we assess the response of the people and the community to these new interventions that we are bringing to them. Then under village mapping, we have a pilot project of Mosoima village. This area is one of our prime areas because it's located along one of our main district roads. So it's a prime area because as you are getting into the town, that is literally the face of the town. So it makes that a prime area. So that is why we have marked that as village mapping, where we map part of it, then the rest we number it and plan it out as being part of our council layout. But then we don't leave out the villagers. We collect the village registers and we coordinate with the village community as well as the headmen so that they too can have documentation, because ultimately we found the villagers and the settlers there. So ours is to help them understand that it's no longer a village, but it is now part of town, and the council is introducing planning standards, building plans, and all the other standards according to the Urban and Regional Planning Act. We can go to the next slide. So the challenges, recommendations, and conclusion. So some of the challenges we've had are that the communities are not willing to work with the local authority. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a situation where the community feels the council wants to get the land that they've had for so many years. But we've been working with the chief, where the chief has offered to give those people that had very big farms land elsewhere for them to go and have their farms, so that the council can come in, do a layout, register the properties that are existing, and issue out documentation. Then the finances have also been very constraining, not only financial resources, but also human resource, because the area is very big. We have so much work to do, but we have to split ourselves. 1 minute you're doing settlement upgrading, tomorrow you're doing village mapping, and it's been very constraining because you find that today the villagers will agree to work with you, the next day they've sold the land to people. So we've also seen urbanization taking place where we have new people coming in from outside the province and they're buying off land from the villages, and they want their land to be legalized so that ultimately they get the title deeds. Then we are also unable to number stands locally because we have a lands office here, but they do not have a system to number properties. So if we have to number any properties, we'll either go to Lusaka or Ndola, where the regional offices are. Then we'll be able to do any form of numbering or documentation or processing of title for any properties that we have. Then there are no set guidelines on what to do when a planning boundary is extended. So one thing that we have observed as a local authority is that a lot of people are coming in to apply for conversion of tenure right outside the boundary. And those are big portions of land, about 250 hectares. So next time we want to extend our planning boundary, we may not have anywhere to go because people would have already taken up big portions of land. So our recommendations are that there is need to decentralize the lands office to be more prominent in the districts and in the provinces. Our lands office here does issue out invitation to treat and offer letters, but that's as far as they can go. For the titles to be processed and everything else, they have to go to Lusaka or to Ndola for that. Then there's need to operationalize the land policy and to set guidelines on what to do. If possible, we have to implement the IDPs and planning agreements so that even when the planning boundary is extended, that planning agreement will take place, because we'll have areas where we can put social amenities like schools, clinics, and police stations. Right now, that land is very limited because the villagers want to keep the land to themselves. They do not understand the concept of what planning is all about. In conclusion, land management and documentation is still an ongoing process here in Chinsali, and we are trying our best to either do legalization or regularize the land, and also to issue out titles for our areas that we've managed to secure and sold to customers, and are still working hand in hand with our communities so that they reach a level where they understand what exactly we intend to do and how we will achieve that with their help as well, because it's not just about us, but it's for them, it's for their well-being, and it's for their benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Zelita, for that amazing presentation. That was really cutting edge and fascinating, and something that we know is affecting dozens and dozens of districts around the country. You know, in the past 6-10 years, we've gone from 70-something districts to 100, almost 120 or thereabouts. And you can imagine this happening in each of those areas of new districts, as well as you mentioned, the expansion of old districts. And I'm reminded of a presentation a few years ago from the district planner in Lundazi, who was Marianne Kaluka at that time, where she presented many of the same challenges with respect to people converting the land on the edge of districts before the planners get to it, and leaving you with both a state land issue and a customary land issue. Similarly, what happens to the communities? I think you've seen a number of questions here regarding what rights do the community members get? Are they able to upgrade? And if they can't, what happens to them? As I think you implied, the idea of planning in the first eyes of some of the community members is planning to move from a customary setting to hand the land to someone else. And I think those fears have been seen in certain cases. So, there's, I guess, one question here, which is what sort of documentation is given to the villages within the planning areas? I'll let you reflect on that for a moment, and then would love if you could take some time to type answers to the various questions during the other presentations. But I hope to come back and continue this discussion.
Definitely, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Salita. That presentation we may have to do again in 2 weeks when we get to IDPs again, in case some of the folks are not on right now. We do have 75 participants on. I'm very happy. Well, actually, let's make sure we have our next panelists. We do. Let's move from Chinsali down to Lusaka. Muchimba Muvumbo is the Director of City Planning at the Lusaka City Council. She holds a master's degree in spatial planning from the University of Zambia and has 10 years of experience in urban and regional planning. I expect that the challenges of planning and documentation in Lusaka is certainly going to be no less challenging than that in Chinsali. So really pleased to have you here, and the floor is yours. Just to ensure you can get your mute button on the bottom left of your screen, it should be. Great, we can hear you. Thank you.
You could hear me now. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. My name is Chimba Muvombo. As stated, I am currently Director of Planning for Mazabuka, but I'll be making the presentation to just give you an insight with regards to what role Lusaka City Council has to play in facilitating the 5,300 titles that have now been issued by the Ministry of Land. So my presentation will primarily focus on the simplified planning to facilitate title issuance in Lusaka, Zambia. If we could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so the program was actually initiated in 2014 with the goal of issuing certificates of titles to 5 billion titles in 2020. This meant that 15,000 titles were actually issued in 2013. So the aim of the Zambia National Titling Program, with the help of local authorities under the Ministry of Lands, had the key objective of ensuring that land tenure is provided to property owners by registering all properties in the country. It also had the objectives of regularization of unplanned settlements, prevention of displacement, increasing revenue base and investments in the country, contributing to economic development. I'm sure for all of us that are seated in listening to these presentations, it's not skyrocket science that once you increase security of tenure, it increases not only the revenue base for local authorities, property owners, but also as a country at large. And then it was also meant to reduce the inequality of access to land due to the different incomes. We do hear from the previous presentations that have been made over the couple of days that we still face quite a huge problems in terms of inequality of access to land due to the differences in incomes. Next. So, what did the local authority, what did Lusaka City Council do different with regards to the regularization process in ensuring that this systematic land titling actually took place? So I do a comparison in this presentation to tell you how much, for instance, it would cost to use the conventional process and the simplified approach. The initiation by the local authority has been that most of this land has been illegally occupied, and it has been quite difficult to actually create land use plans for these areas that are actually not, that have not been planned for. So if you're going to go in and use the conventional planning processes, it will actually cost you about 50,000 kwacha at that time, maybe 2018, 2017, which is roughly about $40,000 US. Then in terms of average time, for the processes to go through in terms of getting the necessary planning approvals, including the site visits and the like, it will take about 5 months to be able to create these plans. And then the approval processes through the local authorities and getting the numbering done would actually take about 1 to 2 years for just one area. Next. But under the systematic land titling or land use planning, that approach that Lusaka City Council used with the help of the Ministry of Local Government and also the Medici Land Governance, you find that Lusaka did have future plans, but it was not able to actually actualize these plans. Hence, there was a need to actually use the national titling approach to be able to title these. So more than half of the people in Lusaka City actually live in unplanned settlements. So of course, like our moderator did say, Lusaka presents its own challenges in that you find that almost half of the people in this city are actually settled on unplanned settlements. So therefore, the systematic land processing, the systematic land titling process introduced an exercise of mass issuance of titles in 33 settlements out of the 37 unplanned settlements in the city. We could go to the next slide. So under this approach, the land use planning for systematic land titling was streamlined using GIS vectorization of boundaries before survey and data collection was undertaken. Systematic land titling allowed for planners to apply standards where in already developed areas, that is to produce maps that were in accordance with the law, which included that all these parcels should have access, an access road. Of course, we noticed that in these unplanned settlements, access seems to be one of the biggest challenges. And if we were going to go, for example, with provisions that existed in our previous legislation, such as the Town and Country Planning Act, this was not going to be a possibility. But the systematic land titling approach took an approach where the planning was actually being done in an area that was already developed, and this vectorization was done on already existing properties. Next slide. So the streamlined planning process under the systematic land titling approach was that plans were created on behalf of the council and forwarded for approval. You did hear our colleague from the Ministry of Lands did highlight that these plans were created and then brought onto the local authority for the approval processes. It noticed that during this process, because Ministry of Lands working with Medici did have some cost-saving tactics or techniques by using GIS, in which the pre-vectorization was actually done together with the city planners. In this particular case, you notice that during this process, there was no demolitions that were taking place. Therefore, there was no need to compensate landowners for demolishing their homes. It also reduced the time for the creation of the layout plans through the approval time. You notice that the approval time was streamlined, that the approval would take place through the office of the town clerk, and aerial photos were used to generate land use maps and layout maps. GIS was able to combine different data sets to help generate the land use maps, and then saved on also the time that the surveyors would need to actually go into the field together with the planners. Next. So what benefits did Lusaka City achieve from the systematic planning approach? You find that It had the ability to approve the neighborhood plans that were covering hundreds of parcels in just one sitting. We also found that the simplified process means that less handoff between the departments at the local authority. I'm sure you'd have some insights to say that once the planning processes happen, you find that maybe the engineering department would need to be involved, the finance department would need to be involved in terms of collections of fees. So this particular process had all these technocrats sitting at one table and being able to actually approve these plans. Therefore, it was cost effective, it was structured, and it centralized the approval process. It was also service driven, and then safeguards the welfare of the citizens by ensuring that it safeguards the welfare of the citizens by preventing incompatible land uses in a given area, because the planners were able to say that these uses should not continue in this particular manner, but we could actually change some uses. It was also beneficial in that it ensures that the area is sustainable for productive living, and then also provides for future development of the area. When it comes to issues of sustainable and productive living, we noticed that there was a lot of order in the chaos within which people had actually developed this settlement. You'd find that in as much as there were no layout plans in those areas, you'd find that people would leave certain spaces that were common spaces. There would be football grounds, for instance. There would be places where people would have left for markets. So those were kind of left in that particular way to ensure that this kind of productive living actually took place in these densely populated areas. Next slide. So that is just the land use map that Lusaka City currently uses with regards to the comprehensive or the development plan as it awaits the preparation of its integrated development plan. So it clearly shows the land use where the residential areas should actually be sited and the like. So you find that in this particular area, in this particular land use map, you find that some of these areas were not some of the areas that were actually undergoing the systematic land titling processes were already falling on areas that could have been residential areas, but were not actually, did not actually have the land use map, the actual layout plans. So this process, I think, actually helped to actualize the provisions of the land use map for Lusaka. Next slide. So this is just an example of, for instance, the process that took place. This is a Google image that was taken for Gabon settlement. You notice that an aerial image was used at a high resolution, and then a land use map for Gabon was actually created just using the high resolution map. As I said, pre-vectorization using GIS was undertaken to create what is actually on the right. So these are some of the benefits that were leveraged on the use of technology to be able to come up with those maps, which shortened the time within which these processes could actually have been taken. The next one. So what were some of the results from the streamlined planning process? Completed 30 demarcation areas, which actually represent 63,000 parcels. The aim was actually to come up with 53,000 parcels, but through this process, we were able to come up with 63,000. The cost, or the average cost, which was about 18,000 kwacha, which is about 18,000 US dollars, was the cost that was actually incurred, which was almost less than half the cost if we're going to use the conventional method. In terms of time and processing these particular documents, you notice that processing including the land use preparation of the maps was actually completed within a period of 6 months or less, which was quite beneficial for not only the local authority, but for the city at large. Next. So in terms of upgrading, land upgrading versus the systematic titling approach, you notice that this was performed by the local authority in informally settled areas. The planning standards in this particular case were standardized. This required city planners at the local authority to follow the process and create a comprehensive local area plan, conduct public meetings, and display maps in the area. This also requires that citizens be compensated for their land when they were affected by changes, which includes giving them new land or financial compensation. We noticed that over the years, it's been quite difficult for us as a country to be able to actually undertake the upgrading of most of the settlements because of these processes where we'll say, okay, when we take out and do the more upgrading to bring up these areas to the standards of, for example, the formerly planned areas, you notice that most of these will not succeed because of the huge compensation that is actually involved. So through the systematic planning approach, we were able to introduce technology to create maps, like I mentioned, through GIS and the vectorization processes. We're able to generate the maps that fit to the legal provisions by following the processes and create a comprehensive local area plan, conduct the public meetings, and display the maps in public places. Then it was also a process that brought in comprehensive team building for all the planners and the various institutions that were involved through this process. So as a summary, a total of 63,000 parcels with an average of home occupancy of 6, which affects about 3,780 people was undertaken. So you notice how many livelihoods have actually been improved through the process that Mr. Tembo from the Ministry of Lands actually mentioned. We hear that not most of them have collected, but they feel that even just collecting an offer letter is good enough for them because they feel that that is some form of ownership and like the way it was in the past. Then it also impacts on revenue stream for the local authority. Over time, we expect that an increase of about 19% through the correction of rates and through the correction of actually property rates. So we noticed that local authorities, of course, are looking for new ways within which they can generate income. And this forms as one of the most important ways within which the local authorities will be able to generate income. So we actually just do have a summary table there, which shows that through the conventional planning approach, the cost to produce one map will actually be 5,000 kwacha or $4,000 which must be quite high now given the rate of our dollar. So if we're going to create 28 maps, it would be about $212,000. While through the systematic planning approach, $50,400 was actually used. When it comes to the approval time, it was approximated that if we were going to use the conventional planning approaches, this was going to take us 5 years, while through the systematic planning approach, we actually did take a period of 6 months. In terms of displacement costs, you notice that most plans that will give us, be it in terms of roadworks, doing conventional planning, will usually be about 3% of the development plan cost. However, during this process, no fees were actually incurred in the process of actually doing the systematic planning approach, as most properties or parcels were left and planned around the way residents had actually settled. In terms of resources, we did need in the conventional planning approach about 50,000 kwacha, while in this particular case, about 4,100 at the time was actually utilized. That is just a summary with regards to comparing the two processes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Machimba. That was a really great presentation. And it was really nice to see such an optimistic, solutions-oriented presentation. I think we're used to hearing about the challenges and difficulties. Here we saw the optimism. And, you know, it makes it look so easy. I'm sure it wasn't that easy in practice. And, you know, I hope some folks will write in on the answers about that. It was interesting, it's been interesting to compare and hear some of the terms coming out here that people think are adequate for their own feeling of tenure security, whether they feel comfortable with an occupancy certificate or an offer letter or a council certificate, if those are still going in some places. And, you know, and then we have maybe the gold standard and almost unachievable in some places, the state leasehold title. I was really intrigued by the pre-vectorization opportunities for reducing your costs of displacement and any real negative impacts on households. So, you know, really glad to hear that. And yeah, look forward to some questions coming in. But with that, let's stay on the topic of digitization, of sort of technological solutions. We'll come over to really happy to introduce Kelvin Chibangula, the Assistant Surveyor General. Kelvin's responsible for cadastral services in Zambia. He's a member of the Survey Control Board, which is responsible for registration of practicing land surveyors. He's trained from the University of Zambia, and he's really passionate about work related to cadastral services and land registration. And I expect, as always, Kelvin will be as optimistic as Muchimba was on the way forward. So with that, thanks, Kelvin. Looking forward to hearing from you. If we can get you off. There you go.
Thank you very much. My name is Kelvin Chibangula. I'm presenting a paper on digitization of cadastral maps as part of the cadastral index map in Zambia. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone and say good morning to those that are outside the country and good afternoon to those in Zambia. Please, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so the paper that I'm presenting is focused on the digitization of the cadastral maps that we are doing as a ministry in Zambia to try and improve accessibility of those maps and see how we can improve on the efficiencies of the activities that we offer as a ministry. So the scope of this digitization program is mainly to convert all paper-based cadastral maps into digital format. The idea is that if we're able to then have them in the digital format, we'll then be able to have more people being able to access those maps and use them as it were. Also, if you notice from the picture that I've shown on that slide is that our registries are actually full with the maps. And obviously, as time goes by, we have to produce more maps, and the challenge of storage will forever keep on increasing. Over the time, also, a lot of maps are torn, and these are maps that we need to use, and we think that it's better that we convert them to the digital format where it is easier to store, and the issue of them being torn can then be sorted out. Thirdly, is that these maps are mainly, as you may be aware, the ministry is only in Lusaka and in the provincial centers. It means that in the districts where the properties are, the people have no access to these maps. They literally have to travel to either the provincial center or to Lusaka to be able to access these maps. But when we digitize, we can improve in terms of access of those maps for various uses. From the ministry side of things is that also because the maps are in paper format and they are not seamless, it becomes difficult for us to be able to detect, for instance, issues of encroachments or overlaps that arise as new properties are being created. Because we receive applications for us to number properties from various districts, and we have to check that what we are numbering is not encroaching on what is already existing. But then it is difficult because we have to pull all sorts of hard copy maps and put them together, and that could be quite a challenge. I can go to the next slide. Okay, so the methodology for this program is basically to try and mop up all the maps that are dotted across the country from various institutions, and then prepare this data for vectorization and compiling them into a seamless database of maps, which then will be shared maybe on our national spatial data infrastructure and also linked to our Zambia Integrated Land Management and Information System. So the data collection process involved collecting the general plans. These are plans that relate to properties that have been surveyed and their boundaries fixed, but also to other properties that have not yet been surveyed but have been approved. The plans have been approved, the properties have been created, and they have been given property numbers. So all those site plans were collected, including any other record that pertain to these properties, one of which could be the survey records that may be dotted across the country. And we are collecting this not only from the Ministry of Lands, but also from other ministries like Ministry of Agriculture. We're collecting from the local authorities across the country, from the provincial planning authorities, and from the Office of the Vice President. Because as you may know, properties relating to settlement schemes kept by the Department of Resettlement, which sits under the Ministry of, under the Office of the Vice President. So the data was collected from all the provinces as I have indicated. And as you can see from those pictures, I was basically just trying to show how our officers were going around the provinces to be able to collect that data. The data then was brought to the digitization center in Lusaka, which is the last picture on that list of pictures, where the sorting was then done and the scanning of these maps as well as georeferencing them to allow us to be able to do the vectorization. Can go to the next slide. Yeah, so when the data is then prepared for georeferencing, what then happened was to be able to begin to vectorize those properties. Because the digitalization that we are doing is not just to scan the maps, but to be able to replicate the maps in terms of vectorizing the boundaries, meaning that we'll not just be seeing the map as a picture, but we can interrogate the map in one way or the other by way of extracting some information from there. So this vectorization was done for the surveyed properties using the survey records, the coordinates that are in those were used when the surveys were being done. For the others that are not surveyed, we then had to vectorize them after georeferencing using the various features that we could notice. When this vectorization was done, we then also had to capture the attribute data because that is also very important. So part of the attribute data which was captured was the parcel numbers themselves, the area sizes of each of those parcels, the location where this property is located in terms of districts and also in terms of suburbs in those districts. what are the map reference number for each of the, which map can we then find this parcel? What are the self-record numbers? And this information will then be uploaded on our national spatial data infrastructure, which is linked into the Zambia Integrated Land Management System, where the ownership details are kept. So we are marrying basically the issue of ownership and the issue of the boundaries. You can go to the next slide. So after that it was done, the next activity was to be able to do some kind of quality checks. And in the process, we noticed a number of issues, for instance, where we could, some properties could even be titled, but we noticed that there are some overlaps, which we, as a ministry, gave us information that we need to then move in and see how we could clean that data. So we're checking for things like overlaps, we're doing topographical edits, we are adding the attributes to those data sets. And this work was done by the various people that we had put together from different institutions, but predominantly from the Ministry of Lands. We also had to check on how the transformations were done, because you will notice that some of the properties, which are even on title, were done in what we normally call local surveys. These are systems that it is very difficult to be able, for somebody to be able to interpret just by looking at the coordinates, because they are localized to a very small area. So that also needed to be transformed so that we're able to bring it to the system that everybody could understand, and that was followed by the compilation of the reports. The next thing then was to be able to upload this data in the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. Obviously, we haven't uploaded everything as at now, but some information has already been uploaded. We are cleaning the remaining part of this data set so that we're able to upload that to the system as well. And once that is done, this information will then be available to the various users. And the information that is sitting on the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, as I indicated earlier, will then be linked to the ownership information on the ZooMis. And then it becomes easier for us to really fully understand both the spatial as well as the alphanumeric data. And this information is available to the decision makers to use for various uses, as I'll be able to demonstrate in the next few slides. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to focus more on the benefits that comes with this exercise. And as you notice from I've basically just put three perspectives. One perspective from the government side, the government institutions, what is the benefit? Also from the professionals, the experts, maybe the land surveyors, the planners, the mapping experts, as well as the ordinary citizen. And perhaps the customary leaders, how can they use this information? How does it help them to be able to manage the land that they preside over properly? So from the government perspective, one of the issues is that we expect that the surveys will be examined at a faster rate, because one of the things that we check for when we are examining the records that are submitted is that we check for encroachments. And we literally have to go and look for maps pertaining to that area for us to check for encroachments. But with this, it means that we immediately just put the coordinates that the surveyor has submitted on that database, and we're already able to thrash out those issues of encroachment. We remain with other aspects of examination that can then be followed through. And our anticipation is that this will quicken the process at which these records are approved and help reduce the duration that it takes for somebody to be able to get their certificate of title once they have applied for that certificate from the ministry. One of the other issues that it will help us reduce double numbering or overlaps of properties, because we're immediately able to notice those overlaps. You notice that there are a number of inspections that the ministry does. For instance, if they want to repossess a property to check the level of development, this will help them, will help us as a ministry to be able to notice some of those things right from our offices, because we can literally punch on the property and be able to view, if we have a latest image, for instance, be able to view what kind of developments are there in around that period of time and make a decision without necessarily having to travel long distances to go and carry out those inspections. This information is also helpful in terms of cleaning the data in the land information system. There are a lot of records that are sitting in the system with incorrect information, especially pertaining to the sizes of the property. And this incorrect information affects issues of billing, of ground rent, for instance. How much somebody is billed is a function of the size of the property, the location of the property, and the land use. So if the property size is not correctly captured, obviously then the people will either be overbilled or underbilled. So this will resolve that problem. And it will also give us an opportunity to do selected areas to do the billing, for instance, as opposed to having to bill for the whole city, because the system has got those restrictions. There will be a benefit in terms of land audit, because we can obviously raise a number of questions on the NSDI to answer some of those land audit issues. From the professionals, for instance, the land surveyors, the benefit is the issue of having them to quickly carry out those surveys, as the theoreticals could easily be provided. So they will be doing their surveys a little bit faster for the planners. They will have the base map that they can use as they do their plans, and they can cross-check that everything is in order, as opposed to just maybe planning a subdivision in a small area. So issues of road connectivity will be attended to, as well as avoiding encroachments on road relays. On the customary side, it's basically for the customary leaders to be able to understand which parcels in their chiefdoms have been converted to leasehold and how much is it covering out of their chiefdoms, and they'll be able to make decisions as to whether they would want to add more and things like that. That basically ends my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kelvin. I appreciate that you had your own timer. That wasn't us sending a timer off in the background for your minutes. So thanks for that. Really nice complimentary piece to the last one. I think I'll have a question for you in just a second, Kelvin. There was something you said that really resonated. First, I'm really glad we have more people. We keep on getting more people as the meeting goes on, which is a good sign that some people are finding value out of this, or that people are very excited for our final speaker, one or the other. But I was really taken up by the metaphor you put about mopping up, because there really is this need before we go out and document to clean up. And make sure that we've cleaned and know where things are before we add new complexity and go out and start documenting again and potentially create conflict and more of a mess. So I was really sort of struck by that metaphor. But I guess of mopping up in advance of all this. But I guess my question was, where can we actually find this data online? Where is the MSDI, and is it going to be accessible to the common Zambian at the end of the day?
Okay, so as things stand now, the The maps are accessible on the government website. If you go to www.map.gov.zm, you will be able to find this information. Obviously, we'll be adding more as we go on, as I indicated earlier. So that information is available. Perhaps later on we'll decide in terms of accessibility, but for now it's accessible to everyone.
Great, thanks so much for that. I think there may be, or oops, I actually got the screen smaller. There may be some more questions on the side from folks. I hope that people remember that you can type in questions in the Q&A box next to the chat box, questions for Kelvin and from Chimba. So for a final presentation today, and I think it's been a nice discussion so far. I'm really pleased to invite Didier Sagashia onto the floor. Didier really brings a whole other level of expertise and experience to this activity and this work because he's done it before. Didier is the country manager for Medici Land Governance in Zambia. Before that, he was a consultant with the World Bank and worked as a public servant in Rwanda for a variety of capacities for 14 years. Most relevant, he was the head of Lands and Mapping Department in Rwanda when they undertook a systematic land registration of all land parcels across the country, millions and millions of parcels. Part of the development of a modern cadastral system in Rwanda and land administration information system. So I think it'll be nice to close today with a presentation from Didier and hopefully we'll get a few minutes for reflections on this whole ecosystem. But really, really glad to hand the floor over to Didier and hear his thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. I hope everyone can hear me and see my video. I'm going to try to look at what has been presented by Mr. Tembo, Mrs. Muchimba, and even Calvin, but from the service provider. They all mentioned service provider, and the service provider we're mentioning is Medici Land Governance. Next slide, please. So I'll talk about Medici in a moment and what are our products, the experience we have. A little bit of on the systematic land titling, knowing that Mr. Tembo has mentioned a lot and Mrs. Muchimba. But also end with some of the challenges and the lessons learned during the process of the systematic land titling. Next. So Medici Land Governance, next slide, is is a public benefit corporation based in the United States, Utah, in Salt Lake City. We are now celebrating our 2 years anniversary, established in 2018. We are leaders in building technologies that are contributing to land governance, especially tools. I'll go into details a little bit about that. And we have good teams of technologists and subject and experts in subject matters, especially land, which are contributing to our mission being developing, helping individual countries and developing countries in establishing formal ownership of properties and land, which, as some of my predecessors said, will look at developing economies and helping people with the security of land of ownership. But lastly, and most importantly also, government can get more revenue. I think Mrs. Muchimba mentioned that, and enforce property rights, but also enforce and functioning property markets easily. So this is our mission as Medici Land Governance. Next. Next slide, please. So some of our products, next slides. Our products, we have 4 products that we are developing. We have developed we have one called ENAM, which is a systematic land titling application. We have LANDAM, which is a land administration system. We have ACTAM, which is a product helping us to put public records, especially land records, on blockchain. I'll come back to it in a moment. And we have also Varorum, which is our system for land valuation and taxation. So I'm going to go into a little bit of details about these products because they are the core of our business, especially for ENAM, which is a product used during the systematic land titling here in Zambia for the pilot project, which has been mentioned by Mr. Tembo and others. So this application helps us to correct accurate data using advanced technologies, and we use customized forms so that we can correct data on ownership, but also correct spatial data that I will go into details a little bit later. And at the end, we can have corrective approvals, which Mrs. Muchimba mentioned, how it takes less time to do maps and layout plans when you have corrective approvals, which is much more efficient. Next. The LANDAM, which is a land administration system, for those who are land experts in this meeting, they know that once you have created land records, you need a system to administer those records, especially when there are mutation or transactions. So the LANDAM is a product which is built using blockchain technology so that it is resilient, and it helps cities and countries to manage land information, including cadastral records, but also help them to securely store the records so that they are immutable. Next. Then ACTAM is based on blockchain. Not sure if many of you know about blockchain, but blockchain is a technology that generates blocks every time there is a transaction done for the accountant. When you have a ledger as an accountant, when you change anything in your ledger, a block is created, and those blocks get linked to each other and they create a blockchain, and they become immutable because they are decentralized to so many computers, so that they become trusted archives of land records. They're transparent because they are accessible to the public, depending on how each city or government wants. They can be auditable because every time you do a transaction, there is an audit trail that is created knowing who has done what. And it's also resilient because up to now, no one has been able to hack into a blockchain. I have been asking the experts, and they tell me that it might take 20 years to break a hash, which is a code used in a blockchain. So it becomes resilient in terms of database when you have your public records, or especially in this case, the land records on blockchain. Next. Then Varorum. We use high resolution imagery. We have our own drones. We capture drone imagery. Then we use machine learning to capture boundaries of the properties and also size of the buildings. And we can easily estimate the value of the properties using local and local market and the property tax formulas. Then this can help cities and government to quickly update their valuation roll or know the values of the properties that are under their jurisdiction. And from that, the cities can then, and countries can also correct taxes or rates or rent, depending on how their laws are tailored. So this is one of the things, the solution that countries are looking for in terms of increasing their revenue, especially revenue coming from the properties. Next. So in our experience, we are, next slide, we are in many countries right now. We are in Zambia, but we have a project in Rwanda where we are working with the government of Rwanda to do a paperless land transaction so that because Rwanda has registered all its land now, people are being able to do the transfer of land, will be able to do transfer of land using their mobile phone without going to any office, without having any paper. There is a project starting in Liberia. There are projects in the Caribbean, in St. Kitts, and in Mexico, and a lot of projects also in America, which are putting land records on blockchain, especially in Wyoming, in Teton County in the United States. Next. Now, our experience here in Zambia, I will not spend much time on this because it has been mentioned by my predecessors. So there was an MOU signed between Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources and Medici Land Governance to issue 50,000 certificates of titles in 2018. Those was to be done in 33 demarcation area. I think Mrs. Muchimba mentioned those areas. And the World Bank was also associated to that to conduct an impact of the land titling. Next. So we started with community meetings or sensitization where we had diverse group, women, men, elderly, widows, and we had to, some of the objectives of those meetings were to sensitize people to know why and what is a certificate of title, why they need it, encourage also people to be in joint ownership, especially couples, married couples, tell them about the payments, the various payments that need to be done, and also explain the whole process of the systematic land titling. These pictures here are some of the events that were done during the public meetings in various areas of the city of Lusaka. Next. Then, as I said, we are using technology. We used GIS to prevectorize boundaries of various areas. So trying to look at different boundaries, both hedged and unhedged, and come up with maps, as Mrs. Muchimba mentioned. And from this process, you can go to the next slide. We were able to send enumerators to go plot by plot, parcel by parcel, using ENAM. And first of all, they could verify the boundaries of each properties and checking the exact location of the boundaries, and they can pinpoint them. And they had also GPS to increase the accuracy of the boundary location. Then correct other information that I'm going to show on the next slide, please. So for every ownership information, we were to capture if there is any property number which is existing, the owner's name, the gender, the NRC number, their phone number, the types of ownership they had. For example, if someone used to have an occupancy license or a land record card or any other type, the types of land use, the ownership documents they can present if they have purchased the property, if there is any dispute or encumbrance, and we could even take pictures of the owner and even the picture of the property itself and pictures of all supporting documents. So what you see here is a tablet we are using when we are on the site. And this tablet is loaded with the ENAM application, which has been developed by Medici Land Governance. Next. Then after we process information in our office, we go for public display where we print all the maps that of the property that have been captured, and we even print information we captured from the ownership, so that people can come and verify if their names are well written. And if there are any disputes, people can go in front of the adjudication committee to try to resolve the disputes. And after that, we go to the next step. Next slide, please. When there is a dispute, what I was mentioning, and the dispute is resolved, the adjudication committee can sign still in the same application that a dispute has been resolved, and the property can be titled. Next. This is the same slide as the one that Mrs. Muchimba mentioned. Once information is captured and we have all the land use plan and layout plan approved by the council, we have developed an automation to generate survey diagrams. Usually with the existing surveys, people have to draw every survey diagram and put the survey records. What we do here in this instance is we have developed a system that generates automatically all these survey diagrams. So if in an area we have, let's say 1,000 properties, the survey diagrams will be generated automatically. That saves a lot of time and efforts in generating those property diagram. Next. Then there are several other checking that are done before we start approval process. The approval process is done by the ministry agent from the Surveyor General, the Commission of Land, and then the Registrar of Lands and Deeds. And I think Mr. Tembo mentioned the printing of offer letter and the payment by the landowners, but also there is a process of producing the certificates and signing them, which I want to go into details because they have been already mentioned by Mr. Tembo. Next. So as Mr. Tembo mentioned, there have been now the issuance of titles is ongoing. It has been done. Issuance of certificates of title has been ongoing in 13 areas. In coming weeks, there will be new areas where we'll start this same exercise for issuance of offer letter. Those are Ngombe, Chaisa, Chunga, Lilanda, and Matero. So next week, if I'm not mistaken, this exercise is starting there, and people get offer letters, as you see the woman on the right with an offer letter, and she has paid already the 20%. Next. So what I want to concentrate on is some of the lessons learned and the challenges that we had, and I will try always to link these to technology. And number one is was mentioned by Mr. Tembe, is the use of electronic signature because it saves time and it requires less effort. I'll give you the example. In Rwanda, we had to issue 8 million titles, and each title had to be printed into 2 copies, and each title was made of 4 or 5 different documents. So you can imagine a registrar to sign on all those 5 copies was not possible. So we had to go to the use of electronic signature. In the case of here in Zambia, one title, certificate of title, is signed by 7 people. Those are the surveyor, the government surveyor, the registrar, sorry, the Commission of Land, and the witness, the registrar of lands and deed, the landowner, and a witness to landowner. So you can even understand why Mr. Tembo was saying that even signing the titles themselves take long. So use of electronic signature will resolve this. Again, a unique land registry. Currently, there are registry in local authorities. I think Mrs. Muchimba mentioned that, and also Mrs. Zelita mentioned that they have a land office in their districts, in their town. But that one is not automatically linked to the national registry, which is under ZIRMIS. So having one unique registry could help avoiding encumbrances, also avoiding double location, or having titles figuring into the registry from the ministry and or registry from the local authority. The third one is about encumbrance, and I'm glad that Mr. Calvin mentioned about the digitization of cadastral index, because it's from that cadastral index that we can know that an area has been given titles, and we don't have to issue another title on top of that. But currently, there are a lot of areas that have been where people are staying in, and they have, I would say, they have squatted the land because there are other titles existing on those properties. But the ministry, and I think Mr. Tembo mentioned that, the ministry is working on how to resolve those issues of encumbrances, encumbered properties. Payment system, this has been mentioned at length by Mr. Tembo. We are working now with the ministry to streamline how payment could be done easily and takes less time, because we have seen that a person to be able to pay can take to him up to a week to make a payment because of going and coming back and getting government receipts or paying from one area, one guichet, which is at the Murungushi house. Mr. Tembo exposed more on the issue that there are less people paying, the 20%, he even showed the numbers. So we think going forward, we will have to see how people can pay in installment or even be able to allow them to pay for a bigger long period. One other challenge we have seen is there is no legal requirement or policy requirements for couples to register spouses as co-owner, and this has created in some instances disputes between spouses, where we see during the capturing of information, husband and wife were mentioned as landowners, co-owners, but when the offer letter comes out, one of them would want to remove the other from the title. So there should be policy requirements for married couples or people in joint ownership to be appearing both on a title. The other challenge in terms of systems, the current land administration system, which is ZIRMIS, has not been designed to handle systematic land titling. But what Medici Land Governance is doing is proposing a system which will do end-to-end systematic land titling, so that once the titles are issued, all the information is given to the ZIRMIS for management. Lastly, when we did this pilot, the images we used were for 2016, but going forward now we are going to use drones to take new images so that we can have exact images reflecting what is on the ground. Next slide is my last slide to just say thank you very much. I would like also to inform you that next week we are starting implementing or rolling out this program from the pilot that was done 2 years ago. We are starting a project with the ministry which will go to issuance of 4 million titles within the next 7 years. And there is a launch of the project scheduled on 21st October. Some invitation will be sent to some of you who are on this call. So I want people to be able to participate during that event. Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you very much for other panelists.
Thanks so much, Didier. Really optimistic presentation again. So once again, it's great to see this evolution over recent years, and the realization too that, of course, Lusaka of 2020 looks very different from Lusaka of 2016. So we have to keep up with the changes. You know, I think maybe just everybody have a quick round of applause. I guess we can't hear you, but I'd like to thank everybody. So I'm just going to clap. Really appreciate these presentations. We have 10 minutes left. I don't intend to use it all, but I do want each presenter to have a few moments to reflect. I'm going to ask a quick question, and if the presenters can really limit it to one sentence or two. I also want to invite everybody tomorrow to attend. Today we talked about state land. I know that we talked almost exclusively about Lusaka. You know, we do have 100 and something additional municipalities and areas around the country, so hopefully we're thinking about applications to the rest of the state land. Tomorrow we will focus on customary land, so look forward to hearing about the documentation differences there. But I guess my final question to the presenters, we still have 70 people online, is, you know, it looks like we have the tools, we have the experience. Didier mentioned that they've got a program now for 4 million titles moving forward. Are we at the stage where in another 4 or 5 years we'll have a few million additional titles rather than 80,000? So I guess my question is, are you optimistic about where things are going in the next 2 years on state land documentation, and why? Emmanuel, I'll go to you first, and then I'll just follow through with your closing thoughts on that for each of the presenters in order. So.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, colleagues, for the questions. Indeed, we have to be optimistic. 3 years down the line, we are thinking maybe 1.5 to 2 million, but there's a proviso there that this can only happen if those issues, for instance, the electronic signatures and the like, are resolved. If a legal framework is done, then I believe that we can be able to achieve. So yeah, we have to be optimistic that these things can happen. Maybe as a background, people should know that Zambia as a country only has around 300,000 titles since independence. So when we talk about 3 million or whatever number of millions, you can contrast it with the fact that since independence, we only had 300,000 titles. So that is the battle that we have gone into, but we are optimistic that we can achieve it.
Thanks. So if we have the legal framework reviewed and updated, then we can get there. Zulita, any final thoughts on how this?
Okay, my final thoughts are that this all can work, especially in a place like Chinsali, where we have most of the land is still bare and it's a green field. So we have an opportunity to correct any situation that arises. And every day we're in the field because most of the work is in the field and not in the office. So the more we go out in the field, the more we're on the ground doing the work, we have a better chance at having state documentation for every citizen and every resident. Even those from outside Chinsali can have documentation for their land. That is what we want to drive at. In the next 2 years, it's a bright future. I'm sure we'll have a lot of titles coming from Chinsali in the next 2 years.
Thanks, Machimba. I appreciate that point on the experiences from the field, from the ground. I note the challenges of the legal framework, but every single individual who you do a field enumeration with is going to have questions about the gender aspect, what rights go with it, distrust. So I think hopefully we're coming to a stage where we can consolidate the best practices for how to talk with someone who's skeptical or someone who doesn't wish to register their spouses and others. And I think it's probably only from those experiences that you're highlighting from the ground that we can get there. Chumba, do you have any closing thoughts?
Definitely. It's been quite insightful to listen out to all the experiences that have been brought in. I think some of the colleagues, as you might have heard, we've been going through this process for quite a while. It's been quite new for us as a country to be able to deal with issues such as simplified planning approaches. But I think it's been a learning curve, and we continue to draw more lessons. We hope that even as we issue these titles as local authorities and for government also, that we begin to upgrade the levels of these settlements within which people live and work. I think would like to state that increasing ownership in itself for these unplanned settlements or these low-income areas not only enables them to be able to upgrade their source of livelihood, but they can take a loan upgrade. So we expect that incrementally, even these neighborhoods will improve, but we also hope that from a local authority point of view, we can provide the necessary services to go with this newly acquired status of having title to your land in an unplanned settlement. So I think it looks quite bright. This experience has been quite good. It's taught us quite to appreciate the informality within which we live and actually work as a country, and not only demean it as we have done in the past. So it's looking great. Thanks.
Thanks, Machumba. Indeed, the document and the planning only takes you there. You have to realize the benefits. You've got to deliver the services afterwards. That also made me reflect, it's, I wouldn't say easy, but for those people who pay and those people who follow through, it's pretty possible. But how are we going to reach that last 20%, 40%, or whoever who's not paying? We have to mop up, as Kelvin noted, even the work that's going on now. Kelvin, do you have any final thoughts?
Yes, thanks, Matt. I think what I wanted to say is basically just to say that we have to soldier on, firstly with the national titling program that Mr. Tembo and Didi and the other presenters alluded to. What we have seen now is that the response is increasing in terms of people coming forth to access those titles, because obviously over time, information has now reached to the people. And secondly, that even as they get these titles, let everything be automated, like the presentation that I made in terms of automating those records so that they're able to access. And in case they are probably overbuilt or something like that, they're able to query and have those things, corrected. So that's what I thought, that we don't have to lax. We just have to ensure that we soldier on and increase the titles. As Mr. Tembo said, until now, we only have about 300,000 titles out of a population of about 18 million. Obviously, it shows that we have a lot of work to do. So we are ready to do the work. Thanks.
Thanks, Kelvin. I think you said it by saying, we have the technological solutions. We've demonstrated that the technology is possible, and it's pretty much there. Didier, we've talked about this before. From your previous success and experience, we need both the technological and the political leadership to push us forward, and not political necessarily from the top, but just the motivation to push through the difficult cases and really the determination to help push it through. How are you seeing positive notes there? What's your feelings?
Thank you, Matt. I think there is a big commitment from the government of Zambia to make this program a success. Actually, Zambia is writing a history now.
Perfect. So we have a chance to write the history. We know the land policy is coming to conclusion. We have the experience.
Land ownership. I want to use.
Oh, sorry. Please continue.
It's okay. It's okay. I wanted to say that we want to see a champion of this whole program also to soldier on, so that everyone is pushed and we get to where we want to be. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks, Didier. And I think we've seen today we have at least 6 champions here together. I know with the attendees we have another 50 potential champions here. So let's continue to work to build that common understanding. It is a full 2 hours. Thank you all for your time. I know we couldn't be together in person this year, but frankly, I'm appreciating this approach of taking 2 hours out every few days to talk through these issues, to absorb these in batches. So let's keep it going. Folks, please attend tomorrow. Please submit your questions and answers. A deep thanks to Emmanuel, Zalita, Muchumba, Calvin, and Didier. We hope everyone will continue to come, and yeah, heartfelt thanks, and we'll see you again next year with more results on this topic, and we'll see you tomorrow on other topics. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, everyone.